Closed captioning. Did it start? Did you see the caption start?
No, I don't.
It should be. All right, let me get us into Facebook. Live. All right, we should be. You'll let me know, Jody, if you see it.
Yep, I'm refreshing Facebook.
All right, terrific.
Maybe.
Yeah. Oh, great. Gainesville, Florida. Well, welcome. I know we have Florida in the house. We have Pennsylvania in the house. Rachel, feel free to tell us where you're calling in from. Okay. Well, we'll get started. I'm just going to share my screen and make sure I can find my Zoom button again. Sometimes it doesn't let me. Okay. So welcome everyone. This is a Candid conversation about systemic racism, and it takes place on the third Sunday every month. We have been, to Jody, we have been doing this for 3 years, over 3 years now, and found that monthly is what works for me and Jody as sustainable action as anti-racists and active participants in the fight for social justice. Tonight, we're very fortunate to have 2 really wonderful humans, Dr. AkuaRose Feather and Dr. Akua.
You froze for a second. You want to?
Oh, okay. And Tasmania Wootson Cuffy. I'll read you their bios in just a moment, but I just want to first start off by letting everyone know who is in attendance that we started these webinars, and the first few months were a little rocky, and obviously there was a lot going on in the United States around social justice and the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many, 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 many others. And so we did have some challenges when we first started out, creating an environment that was going to be comfortable, not necessarily comfortable, but as safe as possible for our panelists to be able to land softly. And the term land softly, I take from having been coined, I believe, by Sonia Renee Taylor. And I'll look for that quote and read it to you later. But what we ask folks, what we want to first say is all land is Indigenous land. And the lives of all of us can't matter until Black lives matter. And with that, we do want to say that all races, genders, cultures, abilities, sexual orientations are valued here, are heard here, are accepted here, and are welcome here. As I said, we're trying to create a safe space for those who come here to share their experiences. This is not a platform for anyone to agree or disagree with our panelists, because this is their life. This is their experience. So if you are here, we're hoping you're here to listen, to hear from them what they have experienced, their viewpoints, and not, it's not for debate. So if you feel like you need to debate, you're in the wrong place. We want our guests, especially here tonight, Tasmania and Dr. Akua, to really feel like they can share from their heart, their mind, their gut, whatever is coming for them, that is true to them. And it is true to them. The other thing I want to just briefly mention is that this is not a platform for our Black, Brown, and people of Indigenous friends to educate white people. If you can ask a question and you can get that answer on Google, please don't ask the people that are here as our panelists. There are times where Jody and I might look things up to support the knowledge of those in the audience, but that is not the job of Akua or Tasmania or any of our panelists, unless they choose to. They get to choose what they offer and what they don't offer, but we just want people not to take for granted that just because they are of Black skin or darker skin, that they are here to educate you when you can do your own education. So we'll pass it on to Jody to tell you the purpose of the webinar. You're muted, my dear.
Let me try that again. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. Misha actually came up with the idea to do the webinar and asked me to come and co-host it with her. And the webinar was created to engage in honest and authentic conversations about the long-time injustice of racism in America. During the webinars, we discussed systemic racism in an effort to dismantle white supremacy from the inside out. And actually through this webinar, there's been really interesting conversations regarding should the term even white supremacy be used. We've had actually attendee not want that term to be used because felt like that word supremacy still put whites forward. And they suggested that the terms white crimes, white violence, white hatred be used. So we kind of just point that out about language, and language means different things to different people. But we are continuing to still use white supremacy and the other terms as well. Our intention with these webinars is to participate in sustainable action and highlight the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color community members, giving them a safe space to be heard about their own experiences, challenges, and hopes without the need to educate white people, and to provide resources to increase everyone's ability to self-educate towards being a more learned participant in the social justice movement.
Want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jody Lewis. I am, by way of a background as far as what I do for work, I'm an attorney. I work for a nonprofit organization representing survivors of domestic violence and gender-based violence. Currently, I do appellate work, but I've done a long time trial court work working with survivors. And this webinar is really important for me as a woman, a white woman. I know that myself and my ancestors have had privileges, and it's important for me to continue to educate myself regarding that and to be a more learned ally and to help dismantle white supremacy, because it's a huge issue in this country and globally. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm Misha Safran, and I've been kind of, one of those people my whole life that has talked about the elephant in the room, that has talked about the kind of pull the things out from under the rug and thrown them out there. Not time to stop. I've been an educator for 30 years. I now have my own private business, coaching and consulting and leadership development and training. And I am lighter than some and darker than others. I've had my own experiences with discrimination on different levels. And what I will say is that I just feel like, there are times where I've heard people ask their friends who are Black what they should do, what they can do, what they need to know. And it's exhausting for our Black brothers and sisters and friends. It's exhausting. And so I felt like it was important to have this platform where they get to just share what they want to share and raise their voice, but also offer financial, stipends, and also offer a place to promote businesses, because it's very important that we raise the voices and the lives. We will all thrive if we take care of each other. And so it's very important to me. It's not a selfish act. It's not that I want to thrive, so that's why I'm helping you thrive. But it's like, I really feel all of our voices need to be in the room for equity, for justice, for diversity, for inclusion. So that's why we do it. And we're not perfect at it. We've learned a lot of different things over the last 3 years. We've made our mistakes, and fortunately, we've still been loved and accepted, and people have urged us to continue doing what we're doing. And we'll continue to learn, because Jody and I both have the mindset, my beautiful fiance and I both have the mindset of growth and love. In fact, I was on a walk this morning, and I'll wrap this up and go right to the bios. I was on a walk this morning and I saw a beautiful woman walking around the park, kind of just ahead of me. And I just happened we crossed just at the right time. I got to see her shirt, and it says, "Everybody deserves love." I was like, yes, that's what I need to see today. So let me introduce you all to our panelists for tonight. We're going to have a really wonderful conversation. We're going to give them the microphone, but as usual, go into that conversation. And if anybody watching on Facebook, following on YouTube, the replay here on the attendees, you can put in the chat questions you have, feelings you have. But again, no arguing, no disagreements and agreements of what they're saying, but Even just pour loving when you hear something, you're like, wow, really, that had to happen to you? I'm so sorry. We really, and not like it's a pity call, but just, give love to all of us humans who are doing the best we can. So Dr. AkuaRose Feathers is an empowerment speaker, coach, and life strategist who helps women intentionally craft a life of wellness so they can show up healthily and as their authentic selves. She is a proud Oakland native. Hey, Oakland in the house. I grew up in Oakland, Berkeley, who believes strongly in authenticity and intentionality. She is a seeker, healer, constant learner who aims to be a conduit of peace and hope for others. Her most recent accomplishment, get ready for this, y'all, is completing her PhD in human development with a focus on traumatology counseling. And sadly, I imagine she knows something about trauma. So she is passionate about helping people who want to achieve their goals. So first, hello, Dr. AkuaRose.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have tonight.
We are excited to have you here. It's been a while. Our paths have connected and then they didn't connect. Like, we're connecting.
Finally.
All right. And Tasmania. This is a long one. I'm going to do my best I can to read it. Tasmania Wootson Cuffy is a military wife of 26 years. Congratulations on that. And a mother of 8. Woo! I thought raising 5 was a big deal, but you raised 8 non-traditional students. She was born in South Mexico in a small town, Izamal, Yucatan, Yellow City. Her family moved to Seattle, Washington, and then settled in Media, Pennsylvania, where she was homeschooled. She believes that the most effective ways to dismantle systems of oppression is by bringing attention to critical race theory debuncal, to looking at oppression methods and spotlighting lawmakers who support or enact them. Creating awareness amongst the minority community by discussing sensitive issues surrounding race, gender, fiscal policy geared towards inequality, distribution of funds, and programs that increase dependence, public housing versus affordable housing. In 1967, while residing in Kremlin, grandmother Ringgold, a communist who had advocated for racial, political, and economic equality, avid volunteer with the community assistance programs organized by the Black Panther Party, and an NAACP member. In 2012, reintroduced to political activism via lobbying, the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, LDB, and 217, the Poor People's Campaign. Jody and I just did a Martin Luther King reading last year with the Poor People's Campaign. It was pretty beautiful. Since 2015, Tasmania worked with children in homes, schools, and residential care centers with behavioral, emotional, and developmental disorders. Thank you for your work, Tasmania. She earned a bachelor's degree in special education and legal studies and an associate's degree in both criminal justice and child development. You and Jody have some things in common. And she is currently studying for her law degree. Woo! And she was in child advocacy and family court between 2015 and 2022. Hello, Tasmania. Welcome to you.
Thank you for inviting me today.
You're
Very
welcome.
interested, very ready to go.
All right, cool. Well, here we go. So we're going to hand the microphones over to Akua and Tasmania, and we will pop in as it feels right. You can ask us to pop in if you want us to, but audience, get your ears ready and your hearts open. Who wants to go first?
The doctor can go first. She earned that.
I appreciate that. And then, of course, frog is in my throat. That's another one of those phrases. I don't know why that exists. Something that stood out, I like how the both of you kind of shared your heart story and the why of why you do this. I have, to the point that you made earlier, Misha, like I definitely have a lot of experience with trauma, and it was definitely the impetus of why I even pursued that degree and why I studied, traumatology counseling. One of the things I was interested in understanding was, we have this understanding of what the human development cycle looks like, typically speaking, from childhood to adulthood to passing. But when you look at what the statistics say about Black lives and about people who have been harmed and who have lived through historical oppressions, trauma is like woven into there. It's in our DNA. It's a part of the system. It's why this podcast exists, is to discuss the systemic racism and the oppression. So my question, my curiosity was, how does trauma impact that development cycle? How does trauma play a part in us, going from childhood to adulthood to passing, and just living our day-to-day lives? And one really specific area that I honed in on as part of like my doctoral studies was specifically Black women, and specifically Black women in our workplaces. A lot of times when we think about trauma, we think about something that's like just super, harmful, a, world event or something super detrimental. And rarely, probably, do people think that there is trauma happening in the workplace, Monday through Friday, Saturday through Sunday for some people, whatever your schedule is. And the biggest thing, and I have experience in this as well, unfortunately. One of the examples that popped in my mind is I was harmed in a workplace and I was treated as the aggressor. I was the one who was harshly spoken to and harshly treated and things of that nature. And a lot of things that Black women endure in the workplace is, of course, we all know the unfair pay, and we also know like the inequitable hiring practices and things like that. But there's also things like imbalanced workloads, higher expectations, working in a group where we are one of, many others, and we're expected to do more, or, in my personal experience, expected to do the work of others who got promotions that I went for. And then they want me to do the work because they recognize that I could do it, but they didn't want to give me that promotion. They didn't want to give me that raise in pay. And that resonates as trauma. Trauma is anything that creates pain, whether it's physical pain, but it can also be mental, it can also be emotional, it can also be spiritual pain. And we have to live with that. And financial, thank you. And there's probably some others that I'm like overlooking or forgetting about. Such impact to us. And if you think about it physically, if you stub your toe on the edge of your bed, as so many of us have, we often do some similar things. We'll stop, we'll nurse it, we'll probably say a couple of choice words as we hop around, right? But
I'm sorry, but that's the opposite order for me. I usually do choice words first and then the nursing and all that. But
fair, absolutely. The problem is when we get traumatized in the workplace, we don't get the benefit to stop and pause. Like, we have to keep going. Not only do we have to keep going, but we still have to keep performing at a level that is higher than what's expected of others. That adds to the trauma. And one of the last things I'll say before asking Tasmania, like where her thoughts are on this subject is, when Black women are in the workplace. Darn it, I lost my train of thought. Wait a minute, pause for 2 seconds. 1, 2, okay. I don't know where it went, but it will come back. So I'm gonna pause right there, and then you'll see me jotting down something if it comes back to me.
thank you so much, Akua.
Absolutely.
Do you want to add in something there?
Well, I wanted to say that I work in a male-dominated field of non-minority people. And being both a female, non-traditional student, you definitely see it, you feel it. I've been asked by a commissioner to actually go and get his dry cleaning. So, and it was kind of bizarre. And so it's like, do you do it or do you not? Do you say something or do you not? So that's the dilemma that I think not only women of color, but all women are put into place. And how exactly do you come across? And because you don't want to come across as aggressive, as we all are known as being women of color, and you don't exactly want to be passive either. So it's almost a chalk line that you really walk when you're in the legal field, because again, there aren't many women who look like me. It's a very small population. It's a very small population for women, regardless of if you're a minority or not. And you're definitely treated differently, because I like to say, I focus more on social injustice. That's how I focus on things. And basically we know it's equity versus equality. It's not enough given to minority communities. And often what is given, it's not equal. So how do we actually fight that? Or do we fight it by just bringing awareness to people? And I'm often asked, what do you prefer? Do you prefer being known as Black or African Americans? And that's when the real education sets in, because there's a difference between being Black and African American. So it's almost like you have to stop and re-educate people. And often I've been, where people want to touch my hair. It's just hair. It's nothing different. It's just hair. What is the fascination with it? So again, we will, at the end of this, we'll get into everything.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
going to
you.
hand it back over.
But
Yeah.
just a quick debrief. I'm reading two books. I don't know if either of you have heard of Mary Frances Winters,
Yeah.
but this is one book she wrote. We can't talk about that at work. So really highlighting kind of some of the things you're talking about around how things are brought up at work. And then I've been reading this one too by her, Black Fatigue, how racism erodes the mind, body, and spirit. And I literally was just, Tasmania, reading the part about how they actually, it's incomprehensible. Okay, so some 6 states and jurisdictions have passed the act and 20 more states are considering it. The bill was also introduced to Congress for federal protection in 2019.
Yeah.
It is incomprehensible to think that we need a law to protect the right to wear our hair as we prefer. That such oppression still exists.
The Natural Hair Act.
That's crazy.
It's the Natural Hair Act.
It's funny, Tasmania, what you mentioned, you asked a question, like when someone says, how do you fight that? How do we combat it? How do we address it? How do we come against it? And when I'm asked that question, I respond with the question, what are you willing to do? Because I think in imagery a lot, and I envision this issue with systemic racism to be like an iceberg. And so, what the iceberg is, it's very kind of smallish at the top, but then if you were to be able to see underwater, there's this huge, this massive, block of ice. And dismantling that in my mind, if I go with the imagery, I often imagine that there are people on all sides of this thing doing their thing to chip away at it. Some people are chipping, some people are pouring water on it, some people are like, however it is, through different ways that symbolizes, folks who are doing trainings, folks who are holding webinars like this, folks who are writing books and educating folks, et cetera. So when someone says, how do we fight it? I want to know, what are you willing to do? Because sometimes it's performative and sometimes there's actual sincerity, and there's no way for me to understand, and I'm not interested in making a judgment about either. So what are you willing to do? One of the things that I was going to mention, the thing that I forgot, thankfully it came back, was there's often this ability to overlook it and not see it, because with Black women, one of the characteristics that we have is resiliency. And for lack of a better term, we make the struggle look good. We make enduring systemic racism look good, to the point where it's almost easy to think it doesn't exist. Well, you must not be impacted. You must not be bothered, because you come to work, you've got to smile every day. You're very friendly. You do all the things we ask. And that is that resiliency in process, and or it's resiliency at work. The problem is, not only do we hold all of the stressors that we talked about before, about all of the inequities and all of the imbalances and things of that nature, but the resiliency is also a contributing factor to stress. Having to be resilient, if you think about it this way, if there was, I told y'all I think in images, which means I also speak in such. If you imagine like walls closing in on you, right? And that you have the ability to lean into the walls and push forward, and they're moving backward, you are accomplishing something, you're getting it done, but there is an impact to your body. There is an impact to have to constantly push forward against something that is working against you. So when the question is asked, how do we combat, what are you willing to do? Because there's so much that could be done. I've got a list, so can definitely share some of that list, even in this setting. But I think it's an important question, what do we do? But it's even more important, what are you willing to do? How can you show up in that space?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's such an important question. Because that, you know, as a white woman, right, and my ancestors, like that's the question that people aren't doing. Like white people aren't willing to take that next step because we have lived in a society where we just get the benefits and we take and take. And then anytime you know, you all make progress, what have we done in society? We've done something to try to take it away. I mean, if we look at Florida right now with their education,
Yes.
and them saying you can't even talk about the enslavement of people in this country, we're eradicating that piece. And this, sorry, I listened to a podcast this morning, so I got all worked up because they were talking about how enslaved people got benefits from being enslaved. And that's their whole theory now of why they're pushing this curriculum, and it's ridiculous. But until we start saying, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to give up, white people? And to the benefit of society, because we know there's all this research regarding that it benefits when we work together. It benefits when we all work as a community instead of taking from one. And so I love that question. So thank you.
Yeah, there's a very short and sweet example that I give in response to that, where they say that Black people benefited from slavery. And I apologize if this is crude. Imagine if a person were walking across the street and they got hit by a vehicle. They got hit, they, you know, spent time in the hospital, things were broken, and they went to the hospital, things were mended, they had a lawsuit, and they won a huge cash settlement. Someone could say, well, you benefited from that accident because now you've got this huge cash settlement and now your life has improved. And it's easy to say that, but then you overlook, you know, the impact of being hit, all the broken bones, all the time, you know, spent, all of the internal processing, all the stress and strain on those who love that person. And so it's easy to say that there was a benefit if that's the lens that you're looking through, and see how hard somebody has to work to come up with that as the outcome of, you know, that, you know, to say that someone benefited from something so tragic as that.
Well, and for Black people, resiliency was forced upon them.
For sure.
You know, it's a survival skill. And I think that what a lot of people don't understand, like kind of what Tasmania was referring to earlier about, you know, should I talk to my boss? Should I say yes? Should I say no? I don't want to be seen as aggressive. Like Black women are known as angry Black women if they speak their mind. And it's like, what the heck? I mean, so when white men speak their mind, it's okay. But if women in general speak their mind, they're BITCHs, right? But if Black women speak their mind, they are angry Black women. And so it's just this whole sense of, I mean, I think given that car accident, I'm kind of come back to you, Tasmania, that given that car accident analogy you just gave, Dr. Akua, I think that people need to understand that there is so much trauma. Who the F cares if there was a benefit?
Yes.
There's trauma that was induced and infused and developed, and it passes down generations.
Yes.
So whether there was a benefit,
yes,
it came with a really high price,
yes.
which no white person would say, I wish I'd been a slave.
There it is. There it is.
So go back to you, Tasmania. Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
I want to say how DeSantis is talking about what we gained during slavery. What did we lose? We lost generational wealth.
yes.
We are 5 times behind financially.
Yes.
Okay, yet we built this country, yet had it not been for us, we did all of the work, but we always benefit the least. One of the problems that I have is when they came up with Juneteenth. Okay, they gave us a day. Are you kidding me? For Juneteenth? Yet Delaware was the last state to abolish slavery. So how can you just give us a holiday in which everyone benefits from the holiday? Not just us. What about reparations? They've actually 3 states, North Carolina is one, they actually passed laws that says if the state passes something as far as reparations for slavery, they will actually take away their funding.
Yes.
So what's a day that everybody gets to stay home for? And yet not very few people knew exactly what Juneteenth was. We knew because of course we're taught this. So where's the benefit? Where's the John Lewis anti-hate bill? Where's the John Lewis voting rights bill? Because we know that from 1957 to 1965 to today, Blacks were actually financially more secure then than they are now. Why is that? Nobody wants to talk about it. Yet they want to push critical race theory. But when you ask the average person, what is critical race theory? They can't tell you other than, oh, it will make Caucasian children ashamed of their heritage. Has nothing to do with that. And oh, we need to take it out to schools. They can't teach it in school because you actually have to break down law cases. It is simply how one entity oppressed another and what laws did they use to do that. And one, we can talk about Jim Crow laws. But when you ask the average person, okay, what were Jim Crow laws? What exactly does that mean? It's only lasted for 57 years, Jim Crow laws were. One of the cases was Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. As long as the entities were equal, it was constitutional. Yet it bypassed the 14th Amendment that says, hey, you're now granted citizenship and also you're equal. But how many years are we still fighting for equality? And it in no way, shape, or form does it say, hey, we want what we lost. You could never give us what we lost.
Right.
I mean, Henrietta Locke's story is a wonderful description of that or definition of that. Here was a Black woman who her cells just multiplied. They never died. And yet they took her cells unknowingly and she died of cancer. They restricted her from giving the same treatment that she was able to give people relief from. And just last month, did they come to a settlement? But how do you come with a settlement for something like that? Right. It played a part in the AIDS virus. It played a part in Ebola. It even played a part in COVID. So how do you give reparations for that? And how do you start? So we're not saying, hey, here's our hand, give us a handout. No, we're saying, give us our due. We can even go as far as inventions. Let's talk about the Murphy bed. That was invented by a Black woman in New York who had limited space. But yet, time after time after time, they've renamed it now. Everybody looked at it as the Murphy bed. She was never compensated. Why? Because back then we couldn't get patents. So other entities who they've now created generational wealth that we lost out on. So we're saying, and a lot of people talk about, well, we should end affirmative action. They've already ended it. Now North Carolina state is in court saying, hey, you should not be allowed to, it's not a handout. It's not a giving us a leg up. It's just saying, hey, we want to come to the table equally like everyone else. You still have to pass the test. You still have to pay for it, right? We're just saying, hey, give us equal admissions into college as other people, whereas we were locked out of that.
And what's interesting about the affirmative action piece is that it wasn't even people of color who benefited the most from affirmative action. Right. It was white women who benefited the most from it. And then when you look at legacy students, and that's like if my parents, folks attended a university, I get a leg up. I get to get in automatically because granddad, grandma, mom, dad, whomever was in here. But then we look at affirmative action because of who it's supposed to be benefiting. And then we start making laws to go against it. And I always find it interesting that critical thinking is left out of a lot of these conversations, because why isn't it occurring to anyone? And I'll say that in that way, it's kind of sarcastically as I'm saying it. Why isn't it occurring to anyone to see all of the opposition to things that specifically are impacting Black people, and other communities of color, yes, but like it's a specific about, enslavement, specific things about our history and our history in this country. Why are those the things being targeted? Why is it becoming illegal for, I learned about that recently, about the reparations, where folks are like, okay, if you do this as a state, you'll lose federal funding. No one's critically thinking in these places, or is it just one of those open secrets that we happily just, do that see no, hear no, speak no evil thing? It's very interesting to me, and it makes me wonder if it's a willful ignorance. Is that the word I want? If it's a willful ignorance, or if it's just like, let's all agree, we're going to pretend like we believe this thing is real, and then we're going to go along with it. And that would be in the space, one of the things that when someone says, what can I do? And I say, what are you willing to do? That's one of the areas. Like in the circles where you have conversations in your families, where the cameras are not there, where, no outsiders there, it's your community, it's safe, and these kinds of conversations come up. If you're in that space as a, person who has that societal privilege because of your nationality, because of your background, those are the spaces where you start correcting people. And those are the spaces where you start using your voice to say, hold on, wait a minute, let's think about this. Let's, here's some research, here's some information. If you're not well versed in it, point them to this podcast, point them to all of the, different things that are existing, the books that are written, just to begin to plant the seeds, and don't let up, because it's not one of those things like that's a quick cleanup. We're talking about hundreds of years of a systemic, which means it is woven into the systems that orchestrate and run this country. So it's going to take some time. So buckle up, dig in your heels, and become committed to being that voice in those circles where we probably won't be there. In those closed doors meetings, we won't be there. So that's when you start, that's one of the things, start having the conversations there. And even if you have to admit, look, I don't know everything about it, but I understand that some of the stuff you're saying right now doesn't make sense. And all I know is, there's a YouTube channel, there's a book, there's a thing, and I want you to read it, those are some of the things.
I'm going to take a kind of a commercial pause on that, because anybody who's watching us on Facebook right now, anybody who's watching the replay, any of you who are in the webinar as an attendee, think about that question, because, why are you here? You want to learn, you want to see and hear and understand the experiences of people. Maybe you didn't realize it was as bad as it was, or whatever the reasons are that you're here. And think about, what are you willing to do? We always put a call at the end to people to say, hey, find one thing that you can do that's sustainable. Is it that you're going to read up on things? Is that you're going to have a conversation? Is that you're going to volunteer? Is that you're going to donate cash somewhere? Figure out, what are you willing to do? So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Akua, because I think that's been the biggest part for Jody and I. A lot of people, they go to the protests and then they're done, right? It's like, woo, and then, right? So we want this to be something that's sustainable, because we need voices, we need bodies, we need minds, we need hearts, we need thoughts to be going in the right direction, which is equality for all. So those of you who are watching, the other thing I forgot to mention, those of you that are on the webinar right now as an attendee, at the bottom of the hour, we're going to shut off the recording and the live stream and invite any of you onto the camera or audio to join us in conversation with Akua in Tasmania when the webinar is officially over. So sorry, Facebook and YouTube, but everybody else who's actually registered, then you can join us, and just kind of giving you guys all a heads up. So back to y'all. I just want to make sure I put that out there. Answer that question. Anybody who's watching this, think about it and really do the willingness to just at least write something down. Are you going to read a book? Are you going to read a documentary, watch a documentary? Are you going to call a friend and say, hey, let's talk about race? What are you going to do? What are you willing to do? So, all right, I just put that out there. Back to y'all.
I think I'll add to that. And Tasmania, if you were going to say something, I wrote down what I was going to say, so I'm okay to yield.
I think it's not only educating other people, but it's educating us. What do you define as? What do you go by? Do you go by as Black, or do you go by as African American? That's one of the biggest questions also that people are struggling with, because we have to remember, what we came from. We were once colored, then Negro, then Black, during the 60s. And then during the 80s, they started to say African American. Why? It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with a culture or a origin. And I think it's very important, though, that even when we go back, when we talk about slavery, the Civil War had nothing to do with freeing the slaves. It had to do with economics. Okay? If you were in the South, you paid more taxes. Why? Because you owned property, in which people back then were considered property. So they're like, hey, why are we paying so many taxes? And in the North, they're not. That's when they came up with the 3/5 law. You weren't even considered a whole. So I think for people, they need to be re-educated on their history, because 40 to 59 years old, their history is very important to them. The book said it was 76%. But when you talk to people 30 and under, it's only 40%. There was another question, has the information been passed down generations? Again, older people, yes, they talk about it all the time. Younger people under 30, no, because they don't want to think about something that happened 100 years ago. They don't want to give homage. They want to say, hey, well, look at what I did. You did nothing without your predecessors, your people before you. The civil rights had nothing, it had very little to do with voting rights. Everything came out of that act. Your reproductive rights, fair housing came out of that. It had a lot more to do than just voting. Why was voting important? Because we knew if we put people in power who thought like us, maybe we would have a better chance. Yet today, when you look at things, you have a lot of Republicans, they vote as Democrats. You have a lot of Democrats, they vote as Republicans. I always say, forget about the party, look at how those people vote and look at where their funding comes from. You would be surprised how many Democrats get money from the NRA. Yet I believe in owning guns. I believe it is your right to be protected, especially people of color, in which we know that when the police come into our neighborhoods, we're not viewed as victim, we're viewed as the perpetrator. That has a lot to do with it. So back to you, Doctor.
No, I love what you raised. It's a part of that systemic racism is kind of creating an, what's that I word? Identity, creating an identity for Black people. So immediately when I see you, systemically, immediately when someone sees a Black person, there are all of these things that they automatically assume. I don't care what you look like. You could be in a 3-piece suit. You could be in a really nice car. You could, have the close shave or have whatever would be visibly, acceptable. And it's still, Jay-Z has a song and it's still N-word. And he's basically saying that it doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter the neighborhood, doesn't matter what your accomplishments are. The minute you're seen, it's still N-word. And that was one of the things that was so very painful for me when during the pandemic, when all of the uprising happened in response to all of the injustices and Black people being murdered by law enforcement officials. It was so painful because for me, it was a culmination of things that was easy. I'm just going to be completely honest. It was easy to kind of like, what's not necessarily become desensitized, but just to kind of push it, not in the back of my mind, but just push it away because I had to live, I had to do life. And I have 2 kids, they're adults now, but when I was growing up and when I was raising my kids, there was this list of things, these are the way you conduct yourselves in public. If you're ever stopped by the police, you do these things. And if you're ever in a situation where you're uncomfortable, you do these things. And all of the people who were coming up murdered by the law enforcement officials were doing the right thing, right? They were not doing anything illegal. Many of them were just walking down the street and it was other folks who killed,
Or sleeping in their bed.
Or sleeping in their bed or walking their dog or bird, just all of these different things, playing in their neighborhood, just things that was nothing wrong. And so it pained me very deeply because in that moment I was like, what do I teach children now? What do I tell them now? I can't say, make sure you listen and immediately fall to the ground. Oscar Grant. I mean, there's video that shows he was in full compliance, and still he's on a billboard now. He's painted on a wall, not too far from where I frequent regularly. It's heartbreaking, because what then do you say if at a glance someone enters a situation and says, oh, it must be you who did the thing that's wrong, and only because of the color of your skin. It doesn't matter how calm you present. And that is a heartbreaking reality to live in day to day. So if you think about in every single space that we occupy, if I'm in my neighborhood, if I'm in a grocery store, if I'm in a department store, if I'm at work, if I'm at the hospital, there's so many stories and statistics and research about Black women going to a medical facility and not being heard or listened to or respected by the physicians and the professionals in there. There's a study that says that there are some people who are in school, medical professionals, that still believe that Black women can tolerate a higher level of pain than other folks. And I have experience there too. I was getting a out of office, what do they call that? Where you come, but you don't got to stay overnight. Outpatient, thank you. An outpatient procedure, and the anesthesia didn't take all the way, and the doctor was doing his thing, and I said, ouch. And he said, oh, I'll be done in a minute. And I said, out, and I like had to, ouch means stop and give me some more of the anesthesia. And I had to literally look him in his eyes and say, Black women cannot tolerate pain at a higher degree than anyone else. And so it made him blush, and he did all these things. But the sad truth of it is that in every space that we occupy, we are always on guard, because we don't know what you think of us when we walk in.
Right.
Doesn't matter what my intentions are. Could have a pocket full of money and you're still going to think I'm going to steal. I've literally been in stores. I spent some of my years in Sacramento, California. And that was the first time that I really started to experience like open racism, like against myself, like openly being discriminated against. And I literally was walking through the store, watching people my age, I was a teenager then, white kids, they were stealing, I was being followed. And I thought, how ironic. And I never said anything at that time. I was less vocal, and I'm just like, you're following me, but he's literally over there throwing stuff in his pockets right now. Like, you've got it all mixed up, but it's just because of my skin color. And the last thing I wanted to say was, that question that you posed about what are you willing to do, there's another question.
It came
Oh
from
yeah,
you.
fair. I did. The one that you repeated, that you restated, is what folks are willing to do.
Yes.
And an important precursor to that is understanding your why. Because I do value individual. I do think that when someone goes out and protests, I think that's a valuable stance. Hopefully you're voting to match how you protest, right? That's another private act that, folks, that we benefit from, society benefits from. But understanding your why are you doing this? Whatever it is that you're willing to do, why are you willing to do it? Because it's not going to be easy, especially when you're in that space and you start to oppose people who are in your circle, in your community. The feedback, the flack, the pushback that you're going to get might cause you to be like, I gotta go. Like, I'm just going to go back into my little corner and say nothing and just go march quietly and vote quietly and think, why are you willing to do that? Because it's that why that gives it an intention, it gives it a purpose, and it helps you to fall back on something when it starts to get a little bit rough, because it will. But when you start to balance the discomfort and the less popular, the lack of popularity and the social status that you're losing, you compare that to what Black people have been living through today. Like, it didn't just end hundreds of years ago. There are people, my parents are still within the age group of folks who lived through some of this, right? When you think about that timeline, what we're still living through, and the pain and the oppression and the stress and the trauma, it kind of starts to pale in comparison to that discomfort and losing that social clout and things of that nature. So understanding your why can help you continue to do whatever important work you're saying that you're willing to do.
Thank you. Tasmania, do you want to add anything in
Well,
here?
what I
We're
wanted
coming
to
down
say
to
is
the
that
bottom of the hour. Go ahead.
As far as, the Black Lives Matter movement or the civil rights movement, I don't like criminal justice reform. I can honestly tell you that. I like the restructuring the criminal justice system. Because when you say reform, it's as if there's something wrong and there's nothing, you just want to dismantle everything. But when you say restructure the program and you go after a specific thing, like we know the city policeman, you can have a GED and be a city policeman. You just have to pass the background check and you have to pass the drug test. You can have a GED. Okay, we know that in order to be a county cop, you have to have an associate's degree in criminal justice. To be a state trooper, you have to have a master's degree. That's a tremendous amount of education. And not only that, they have to go through a psychological testing. To be a city police officer, you do not. And again, they don't even have crisis intervention. I have been pushing for years, hey, let's not say reform, because right away you're coming with the premise that everything is wrong. I'm pushing more for, hey, if it's a domestic violence case, how come we don't have a domestic violence worker go out? If it's a mental health call, why is there not a unit that specializes in mental health? That's very important, and they have the funds to do that. When you say criminal justice reform, okay, they're not saying you're going to take away guns or take away all of the money or the power that police have. They're saying, hey, we want to take some of those funds and we want to make sure that they have crisis intervention. We want to make sure that there's a domestic violence worker. We want to make sure, because we know that majority of police officers get hurt doing domestic calls. We want to make sure that there's a mental health aid worker who can de-escalate and not escalate. So I think that's very important. I think, again, that's why they should change that. Also, when you talked about, I remember, I think I was 7 years old, being told how to interact with the police. When you look at certain communities, the police are their friends. When you look in our community, we were always taught to fear them. Hey, keep your hands straight. No sudden movement. Low tone. Watch the pitch in your voice. Don't look them in the face. Look on the ground. So we were always taught these things. And even today, we find that we are still teaching these things. And I think it's important to learn equity versus equality. What do we mean by equity? Basically, we want to give people, all people, everything that they need to enjoy a full life. Equality, hey, we want everybody across the board to have equal distribution of whatever it is that they're giving. That's all we're saying. Nobody's saying, hey, here's my hand. I want a handout. A lot of times when we have these talks, the minute people say reparations, they always say, oh, well, during World War II, Jewish people were not given reparations, and they went through just as much as you did going through slavery. Okay, why were they able to pull themselves up from their bootstraps? And why can't you? We built this country. Everything that you have is off of the backs of us. Remember, during slavery, we were trainers. We fed your children when you couldn't nurse. Okay, we had all of the skills, and Reconstruction showed that. They were drowning. The Southerners were drowning. Why? Because their commerce was slaves, versus the Northerners, they had trade. So without the slaves, you would have drowned, in which a lot of them did, because that was their commerce, either slavery or cotton. Can't eat cotton, but yet they don't want to give us our due. We're not saying we want a handout. We're not saying, hey, give. And yet, every time they talk about welfare, they always picture minority people. We did not get welfare until after the 1965. Welfare was enacted for single white unwed mothers. Okay, we didn't get it. Another systematic oppression program. Why? Because they took the men out of the home. In order for you to get welfare, your husband or your boyfriend they couldn't live in the home. So again, you took out the male figure. If you read the Willie Lynch letter, he said, if you follow this line, 300 years from now, it will work. What did he tell you? He said, demasculate the man, right? So you see, it's a systematic process. Even when we talk about critical race theory, what laws were given or enacted from one group to oppress the other? Let's talk about Jim Crow law, right? Again, Plessy versus Ferguson, he was a mulatto. That's why they used him. But yet the Supreme Court came back and said, hey, as long as everything is separate and it's equal, what's the problem? Okay, look at some of the schools. Everybody was in one room. They got the books from the rich white schools. Yet they said, hey, it's equal because you got the same book. A lot of the papers were missing, but it's still equal. It wasn't until Brown versus Board of Education where they could psychologically show that segregation harms children's minds. That's when they passed it. So again, we still have to go back in our history to understand where we are today. And a lot of people today say, hey, you can work for yourself. You can be an entrepreneur. Look how long that took. Years ago, Black people couldn't even go to college because why? Back then, we were not granted loans. Yet, everything that comes to this country is feeding off of what we did. Yet, they're restricting our rights to equality and equity. So, okay, y'all benefit. And that was one of the reasons why they overturned Roe versus Wade. It fell up under the Civil Rights Act. Once they overturned that, now they can go after restricting your voting rights by redistricting, right? Changing the number of votes that you have, moving the poll places farther, closing them at a certain time when you know most workers don't even get off to go and vote.
Yeah.
Again, that's why it's very important to know how your legislators, how they vote. Look at their voting record. Look at who's funding their campaign, and that will show if you have an equal standing. Because I'm telling you, it will surprise you. A lot of people talk about Clinton being the first Black president, yet he was responsible for one of the most heinous drug laws ever. And when I say that, let's look at opioids. Opioids is a crisis. Crack, what was crack? They gave no money for educating people against crack, none at all. But yet when opioids came out, who got the most pills? Black people wouldn't get pills. We couldn't get a pill to save our life. So, oh no, it's a crisis. Why? Because most rich white kids was popping these pills that their parents had, and they were not putting them up. They were not safeguarding them. Yet you can have a room full of cocaine versus having a little baggie of crack. You got more time for that crack than you did for that cocaine. So now what? That's a systematic oppressive type. But people, you have to re-educate people in order for them to understand fully what happened. We don't have to go back hundreds of years. When was Clinton in? Yet he passed that bill. He passed it. Let's look at the 3-strike law. Okay, another Democrat. So again, people, we better get wise and start seeing how these politicians are really voting on things. Back to you, Doctor.
I'm speechless, and I'm not going to jump in because I know we're looking at time. I just want to say I appreciate all that you shared because all of that is super significant and it's easy to overlook and to not be aware of. So that's all I'll say.
And you know, that's the thing here is those of you who are listening, there probably I imagine there's at least one thing that you learned tonight that you didn't know about before. Not, and I don't mean learn, but you heard like, what? They did what? Look it up, read about it. Find out for yourself, because there are some things that, yeah, we can't know everything. And then you've got things that are, you've got LGBTQ rights, you've got Black Lives Matter, you've got all these different Asian, hate against Asians. There's a lot going on in our country and our world. And so it can be overwhelming. Just pick 10 minutes a week, 15 minutes a week, where you're going to do something new and different to help really build your education, to really kind of identify, yeah, this two-party system doesn't work. I'm not saying I'm going to go and vote for a Republican quickly. But I think it's really important to read the policies, read who people are voting for, and then stand behind what's important for you so that you can get the right people into office. So with that, I know that we're coming up on the end of this time. What we're going to do here is we're going to stay on after I cut off the live stream and the recording. However, first, again, as we bring panelists on, we offer them the opportunity for a stipend, for us to donate their stipend to a charity or for to promote their business. So Dr. Akua, would you like to tell everybody about your business and just tell them everything?
Everything. Okay, cool.
Everything.
So one of the things that I have coming up soon, it's determinedlyready.com. It's a 3-day challenge that I'm offering for specifically for Black women. Anyone can come because it's about workplace stressors, and people are not always able to quit their jobs. And so maybe you are going to quit your job. Either way, you have to find a way to make yourself well so that you can make those decisions, not on a whim, and not on some like quick little, sorry, I'm still soaking in what Tasmania was just sharing, but
I know it's a lot.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yes.
But the goal is to help you build a wellness plan that will help you be able to sustain your wellness, create or sustain your wellness in the workplace while you're enduring all of these different traumatic realities. And everything that you'll learn in this challenge with me is transferable to all of the, any traumatic situation that you encounter in life. And then since you said everything, I also have a play it's an in-person play. It's an unplay, Cute Shoes Hurt. It's giving voice to Black women, allowing us to speak our pain and to speak our joys and to speak our victories. And if you follow me on social media, you can find information about how to come and attend that. It's going to be an amazing production. It's monologues, dancing, spoken word, and it's going to be loads of fun. So.
And that, you said that's going to be in Oakland or that's virtual?
That's going to be in Oakland, September 29th.
Ooh,
yes.
I'll be back in town.
Yay, I would love to see you.
Can you put the direct link to the challenge in the chat? And then I will transfer it over to all the other things when I promote in other places.
Okay.
Your permanentlyready.com.
Determinedly ready. To everyone?
Yeah, to everyone. Yeah. And then I'll copy it and post it, and Jody will take it and put it into Facebook, and I will put it in the YouTube.
And that challenge is virtual. The production is in person. The challenge is virtual.
Okay. And the link to the in-person is on there somewhere?
I did not share that because I was thinking I was only supposed to do one thing, but
no, dear, share all of you. Share
Okay.
all of you.
Love that.
Raise your voice. Yes, absolutely. So I want to first thank everyone who was a guest. Thank Tasmania and Akua for being here. And Jody, do you want to just share a takeaway before we cut the recording and live stream? Share what's on your mind.
Oh, there's so many takeaways and so much on my mind. But where to begin? I think just real important to really think about and take in laws that are enacted. I think both Dr. Akua and Tasmania talked about it, and they really impact what's happening. And, just to go back to Florida quickly, because we kind of talked about it a little bit, but the podcast I was listening to this morning, Florida is even going to allow a conservative podcast to be played in schools. And part of that, one of those podcasts is geared towards kids, but it talks about George Floyd's murder in the terms of he was resisting arrest and he died. That is not history. That's not accurate. And that's what's happening when we don't pay attention, when we don't go to that question of what we're willing to do and why we're doing it, that we allow things like this to happen, where laws are being enacted and it's trickling down into what is being taught in schools, which is inaccurate history and erasing history, which is really, really dangerous. So I think I'll say that and just thank you both so much for your wisdom, your time, your energy, your
Can I
love.
say just one more thing very quickly?
Yes,
I
of
want
course.
people to stop thinking about eminent domain. Eminent domain is old. I want you to start thinking about, if you see this, underdeveloped neighborhoods.
Mm.
Think about underdeveloped neighborhoods. That is the way that the government is coming in and taking away blocks of neighborhoods and pushing the poor people out. Why? Because they want to change the demographic of the city. They
Mhm.
want to get rid of poor people and put in higher socioeconomic level people. So anytime you see that, I want you to immediately pick up your phone and call your legislator and ask them, hey, what are you doing? Because there is no criteria for it. And that's what's so dangerous.
Thank you, Tasmania.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, so I will stop the live stream and we'll all say goodbye, people on Facebook and YouTube.
Hi, people on Facebook. Thank you for joining us, and YouTube.
I'll stop that and I'll stop the recording.